We're back on the Black Shoe Diaries podcast, getting into it, talking Big Ten football with Tim, as always, and we're joined by the boss himself, the managing editor of Black Shoe Diaries, Jarrett. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so as we mentioned at the top, and as you can see, based upon the topic of this podcast, we're going to be talking about the best Big Ten games each week for this coming football season. We're recording this on June 30th. I think this is going to go out a little bit later this week. So as we, get up into, July 4th and after July 4th, I think, football is starting to, it's right around the corner. So we thought this would be a perfect time to take a look at some games, some Penn State games and some other games that are going to be in the Big Ten that we're most excited about. If you're listening to this as well, Jared actually has a post on this on blackshoediaries.com. So of course, make sure you go and read Jarrett's posts. You can get, additional thoughts from him. Of course, we're going to talk about all these games, but you can get additional context and thoughts from Jarrett. So make sure you are checking that out. So let's start with week one, which I'm just pulling up the Big Ten schedule. So basically, how we're going to do this, we'll go through every week. We'll toss out some games, and then we'll get Jarrett's thoughts on what he thinks is going to be the biggest game. Of course, Tim will provide some information as well and his thoughts. So for week one, I think that we're all basically going to be in agreement on what the biggest game is. There's Northwestern at Tulane, there's Utah at UCLA, and then there is Texas at Ohio State. Jarrett, where did we go with week one?
Yeah, I think the obvious choice here is Ohio State, Texas. We got a rematch of the semifinals from last year, which actually turned out to be a really fantastic game. Ohio State had yet another goal line stand to pull that game off. Jack Sawyer had a can't remember off the top of my head if it was a pick six. I think it might have been a forced fumble that he returned to the house. But, really great game to launch Ohio State into the national title game. We also have the official start of the Arch Manning era. I do believe he started a game or two against, let's just say a lesser opponent, not really a big game when Ewers was down last year. So this is feels like his first real start, the beginning of the era. And on top of that, the end of an era as well as Lee Corso. I'll have his last game, College Game Day. I remember watching him when I was a little kid, and honestly, if it wasn't for Lee Corso, I don't know if I really would have gotten as passionate as I was about college football. I started more.
He's got to rock the Brutus head, Jared. I mean, I can't see him putting on the Texas Longhorn head for his.
Yeah, I would never support putting on a Brutus head, but I just think, for this will be the one and only time I'll be happy to see the Brutus head come out. Yeah,
he started out his very first mascot head in 1996 was a Brutus head, and it was when Penn State was playing at Ohio State.
Mm-hmm. It is a shame that because that is a noon kick, which I know at least there's rumors on Twitter that Ohio State and Fox had asked Texas, can we move this to be a night game? I think they wanted to do it on Sunday though, instead of Saturday. They wanted to do a Sunday night, week before NFL, so NFL games, do a Sunday night primetime kick in the shoe, and Texas said, no, thank you. So instead, this is of course big noon kickoff. So a shame in that sense that Corso will have to do. He'll do it in the stadium, which I'm sure will still be pretty cool. But the fact that he won't be out on the game day set making his pick, I would love to see him go Texas though. I feel like that'd be like a wrestling like heels move. Like it might be his retirement match, but you know what? You go out as the bad guy. Not to say that Lee Corso was the bad guy, but Tim, your thoughts on that game? I think that like I said, we're all in agreement that this is very well could be one of the biggest games of the entire college football season. Potentially a 1 versus 2 matchup. I think that this beats out, Northwestern and Tulane, but I think this game takes the cake for best Big Ten game of week one.
I don't know, fellas. I wouldn't sleep on newly minted FBS Missouri State playing at USC that evening. It's definitely Texas Ohio State. That's the obvious choice. As Jared said, Arch Manning's making his debut as starter, presumably. I don't know if he's
Heisman frontrunner Arch Manning, by the way, according to the odds makers.
Heisman frontrunner Arch Manning. We'll see if, unlike his uncle Peyton, can he actually win the trophy. That's something to keep an eye on. But yeah, I think you guys already stated the reasons why it's such an intriguing game, and I'll definitely be watching game day, at least or at least the portion where Corso puts on the mascot head. I have a feeling that might actually happen before they go into the stadium. I feel like they want to get they want to have the crowd's reaction out there. So I'm
Sure.
feeling Corso. The other guys will do their predictions at the normal time, but I feel like Corso, this is the last show especially, I think they'll have him do his prediction earlier than the rest, so he gets a chance to put on that head one last time in front of the masses. Yeah, so
what are we thinking for that game as far as,
who wins?
Who wins? I think we'll see what the AP poll ends up deciding, but I think both those teams are going to safely be, in the top 5. I don't know what the spread is. I imagine there probably is a spread out on right now. I would guess Ohio State is probably
I can look this up right now.
probably like 1.5 would be my guess. But Jared, do you have a lean one way or the other? I mean, it is a 50-50 toss-up game, I think.
So, as a Penn State fan, I always give Ohio State the benefit of the doubt that they'll find a way to pull out. So just based off of past trauma,
okay,
go with Ohio State.
I'm looking at FanDuel Sportsbook. Currently, the line is -2.5 for Ohio State.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So being more objective, I probably would say Texas based off of their returning talent and just where they have the program going right now. Ohio State's replacing a lot, but as we know, their program that can easily reload. And then the thing I mentioned in my post is, they have Caleb Downs on defense, Jeremiah Smith on offense, possibly the 2 best players in the nation. So when you've got potentially the best offensive player, the best defensive player to build around with a bunch of other guys that, may not be short, maybe short experience, but plenty of talent, that's a good building block right there. So,
yeah, Tim, do you have a lean one way or the other on that game?
Man, I
like Texas.
I guess gun in my head, yeah. I think Texas gets some revenge from that college football playoff semifinal game where they lost in a brutal, agonizing fashion. You're marching into the red zone looking to tie the game up, and then you sack, or what is it? It was a sack and a
scoop and score.
Yeah, scoop and score. Just absolute nut punch right there, like double nut punch, really. So that's I feel like Ohio State. Yeah, they do have Caleb Downs, Jeremiah Smith back, but they do have to replace several other key starters. And normally that wouldn't be a problem, but when you're facing Texas right off the bat, a team that, a lot of college football websites and magazines have pegged as one of the national title favorites. I don't know. I kind of get the feeling Longhorns exact some revenge in the shoe, but we'll see.
I just like what Texas has a little bit more. Jared, as you said, Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith is obviously a really good place for Ohio State to start, but they just, they're replacing just so many guys, especially defensively, especially on the defensive line. And you look at Texas and they have, Colin Simmons and Anthony Hill, I think 2 of like the top 5 defenders in college football. So we'll see. It might just come down to Arch Manning versus Julian Sand, 2, 5-star pedigree quarterbacks. I just trust a little bit more with Arch, and I get the feeling that Ohio State is going to be one of those teams that maybe gets off to a slower start than usual. You kind of look back at like that 2015 Ohio State team or 2014 Ohio State team that ended up winning the national title, but lost to Virginia Tech in the shoe. I could kind of see something similar happening. So we spent a good 10 minutes on this game, though. We got to continue on. Otherwise, we're going to be here for 2 hours. So
I did want to add real quick for my runner-up that week. I picked Nebraska-Cincinnati. That's a Thursday night game. For some reason, it's a 9 p.m. kickoff. So being at the ripe old age I am now, I may be struggling to stay awake till the ending of that. But I think that should be a pretty good game. And it's always entertaining to see what Nebraska is going to do. I'm sure you guys have heard this before, but Nebraska is supposed to be good this year, potentially. So we've been hearing that every offseason. I don't know if that's ever true. So it's always kind of entertaining to see, when Nebraska inevitably drops a game like that in the beginning of the year. And, you learn they have a little bit of a long road ahead. But outside of the 2 games we talked about for week 1, there isn't too much to write home about for the Big Ten schedule. A lot of non-con games, but I think those are the 2 that are definitely worth your time.
Definitely. So going on to week 2, not as what I would say is like a better slate depth wise, but not the Grand Slam Texas Ohio State main event. So there's Iowa at Iowa State, There's Illinois at Duke, which is a nice low-key sneaky game. Oklahoma State at Oregon, if that tickles your fancy. Oklahoma State kind of weird rebuilding-ish year with Gundy, but I feel like anytime they get into like rebuilding year, they go and win like 10 games. We also have Michigan at Oklahoma, two very big brands. How good they are at football remains to be seen in 2025. And then I think Boston College at Michigan State has a chance to be an intriguing-ish game as well. So Jared, where'd you go for week 2?
I went Michigan, Oklahoma, because I was thinking whoever loses that game, their fan base is going to be in full panic mode, I think. I know this is college football and we kind of live and die by the moment. But Michigan had a 7-5 season after winning the national title last year. So, they really want to prove that was, more of a rebuilding year as opposed to a sign of things to come. And I kind of wonder, what, Sharon Moore is just entering a second year, but, if they have another average-ish season, is he under the hot seat? And then with Oklahoma, I mean, they were, sitting pretty for quite a long time under Stoops and Lincoln Riley, winning the Big 12 every year. They transitioned to SEC. Things have not been going well. Last year they finished 6-7. They had one, they blew out Alabama, but outside of that, it was a pretty lackluster year for them. So, one of those teams is going to be starting off with a loss early in the season. And, I think they're going to go in a bit of panic mode. So it'll kind of be interesting to see, where they stand early in the season. But outside of that, it's just it's a great helmet game too. If you love college football, that's just a kind of a sight to behold. Two blue chip programs don't play very often. So it's a night game at Oklahoma. So I think, the atmosphere is just going to be incredible. Should be a fun night of college football. And I think both teams have a chance to be pretty solid this year. I wouldn't say national title contenders. So I think it's going to be a pretty even matchup.
Yeah, and I think that it's almost, I don't want to say similar to Oklahoma, Tennessee last year, because that is now, an SEC game, but similar in the sense of both teams will more likely than not be ranked. So even if Oklahoma ends up, being 6-6, I think that they will start the year ranked, or at least by even week 2 will work their way into the rankings, and Michigan will be there as well. So just the hype that will be surrounding the game, and similar to Tennessee in the fact that Josh Heupel, former Oklahoma football player, leading Tennessee, goes into his alma mater. Same thing with Sharon Moore. He's an Oklahoma graduate as well. So just going to be a little bit extra juice for, Sharon Moore, who I think is suspended every other out of conference game this year. Oddly enough, Oklahoma, they said, no, you can go coach that
He's able to pick and choose which games to serve a suspension for.
Yeah, that's always nice. Getting ahead of things. But Tim, thoughts on that game, or do you look at any of these other games in week 2 and find a little bit more excitement in those?
Yeah, just a quick question about that. Who do you guys think is going to be more under pressure to win that one? Sharon Moore or Brent Venables? I tend to lean towards Venables.
I think it's Oklahoma.
He's coming. This is his fourth year. And as Jared said, coming off 6-7 last year, he went 6-7 his first year, and he in between that sandwich was a 10-3 season. But this is an important year for him. He's got to come out and show that the 10-3 season was more the norm than the 6-7 seasons that he's had.
More beating Ohio State last year was, going 7-5, yeah, sure, not great, but beating Ohio State and then also beating Alabama in a bowl game. I know bowl games aren't as important anymore, but to win those two games,
I think he cooled his seat down some.
Yeah.
Of course, you don't know what's gonna. There's rumors about these, how's Michigan going to get punished by the NCAA over the whole Signal Gate thing, and so Sign Gate. So, but we'll see. That's a whole nother can of worms. I'm not going to get into. But as far as other games, I think Pat, you mentioned Illinois Duke could be sneaky good one. Illinois is, you guys probably know, has been getting a lot of hype as perhaps being this year's Indiana, team that is like a dark horse to make the playoff. They kind of come out of nowhere in a way. Although I think it would be a little less surprising with Illinois, as unlike with Indiana, who just seem to come out of nowhere to make their playoff push. I guess a personal bias, our boy Bill O'Brien's Boston College Eagles hitting East Lansing to take on Michigan State in NBC's Saturday night game. I find that a bit intriguing.
I can see Michigan State surprising some people this year. I mean, Jonathan Smith's got a great track record. Look what he did to Oregon State. So I don't think they're going to be Big Ten contenders by any means, but I could see the Spartans, kind of having a bounce back year, maybe, winning 7-8 games and being a pretty solid team.
It's always possible. And I guess Iowa State, that's, I'm not sure what to make of either team this year, but I think that's, I always like those in-state rivalry games. So that's
I think it's always close. I feel like I watch it every year, and every year it always comes down to the very end of the game. So it's just always a hard-fought game that someone's going to win, on a last-second field goal or defensive stop or something like that. So I think you can count on pretty entertaining 3 hours of football.
Moving on to week 3, once again, not the strongest of weeks. There's Wisconsin at Alabama. There's Minnesota at Cal. There's Oregon at Northwestern. So an early Big Ten matchup. Jarrett, did you go with Bama, Wisconsin for this one, as I think most people will decide on?
I did, and honestly, just because I had to pick one game. I know there's 2 kind of big brands, but just considering what happened last year, Alabama wasn't quite as good as they've been in recent years, and they went into Madison and just absolutely trounced the Badgers from beginning to end. I think the final was 42-10 or something like that, but they jumped out to a pretty big lead from the beginning. So I don't really have much confidence in Wisconsin going into Alabama and pulling off the upset. I do think this is going to be a very interesting season for Wisconsin, just because Luke Fickell was a fantastic hire at the time. He had amazing success with what he did at Cincinnati, but it just has not been going well. My personal philosophy is that you try to disrupt the offense after several decades of relying on a tried and true system that you do well. And then you try to, you got to change your recruiting pools. You got to change, your personnel. So I think it's going to be a make or break year. I wouldn't be surprised if Wisconsin doesn't really, probably win 9 games. Fickell, just since we were on the topic of coaching the hot seat last week, I kind of think I wouldn't be shocked if this ends up being Fickell's last year in Madison, unless they really, turn a corner and show a pretty big improvement.
Yep, 7-6 his first year. They go 5-7 last year. Obviously dealt with some injuries at quarterback, losing Tyler Van Dyke, I believe, in that Bama game. I think I was one of the first plays.
Yeah, he got hurt against Bama.
Tim, thoughts on what to expect out of Wisconsin this year? This game in general. What do you actually? Let's kind of talk about Alabama. What are you expecting out of Alabama this year? DeBoer's second year. Another guy that has a great track record in just as a coach, but certainly in his second year. As second year at Washington, they go to the national championship game. What are we thinking out of Alabama? Are they going to bounce back and show that they are still at least a little bit of what Alabama used to be, or are they coming back down to earth as just another good but not great SEC team?
Well, I don't expect Alabama or really any program in today's college football to go on the dominating run that Nick Saban's Alabama teams did in the 2010s. But that being said, I do think they'll bounce back. I think they at least make the playoffs. To be honest, I haven't looked up too much about Bama, but you got Ryan Williams returning, their stud receiver. And so, I don't know who replaced Jalen Milroe, but I'm sure they got some blue chipper in there.
Ty Simpson, Austin Mack, just some, good recruits.
Whoever's back there quarterback, I'm sure they'll find ways to feed the rock to Ryan Williams. And, it's still Alabama. They still stack a lot of talent on that team. So, they had a surprisingly mediocre record last year, 9-3, missed the playoff. Some say it's controversially they got put in over. SMU got put in over them, but I think this year they bounce back. No worse than 10-2. They get into the playoff, and we'll see what they do there. But yeah, as far as Wisconsin, I don't know. Like Jared said, Fickell's on a hot seat. Maybe he doesn't end up. He may not be back for a 4th year unless they. He probably needs about 7-8 wins, like a winning record, to feel safe. And I would say, I keep an eye on the Cincinnati job potentially opening up. Scott Satterfield's on a hot seat there, and
Do you
know,
think
if
we
they
see him
don't,
go back home?
yeah, if they don't improve, I mean, and they get rid of Satterfield, what's to say Fickle doesn't jump ship and go back to where he had his success to begin with? So that's another thing I keep an eye on as far as Fickle may not necessarily get fired, but just jump ship before they can do it for him. So
it is just weird that he was at Cincinnati, had so much success at Cincinnati, and the job that he decided to leave for was Wisconsin, which, okay, some things have changed since then, right? NIL has become a much more important part of the college football landscape. The Big Ten West goes away, but yeah, just weird that that's kind of the job that he decided to leave for. But anyway, we'll keep it moving. Let's go to week 4, which again, not, there's no main event type game, but 3 good ones, at least that I thought. Iowa at Rutgers, Illinois at Indiana, and then Michigan at Nebraska. Jared, where'd you go for this one, this being week 4?
I'm actually pretty excited about the Illinois-Indiana game. I really like that storyline because I am a believer in Illinois this year. I would go on a limb and pick them to be a playoff team coming out of the Big Ten. They were a strong team last year, very strong on both lines of scrimmage. They returned, 18, 19 starters, so they've got a ton of experience coming back. I hate to admit this, but Brett Bielema is a great coach. He's been very impressive. And to his credit, I was the biggest Bielema hater you could find. I think, his experience at Arkansas and just, probably growing older, starting a family seems like it's humbled him, mellowed him out a little bit. So I do find him a little bit more, I wouldn't say I'm a Bielema fan, but I do find him a little bit more agreeable now. But just between the hype around Illinois, their chance to, make a playoff when you consider what the state of that program was a few years ago. And then on the other side, Cignetti did a phenomenal job with Indiana last year. Obviously, they were the most shocking team in the nation, just getting the playoffs. They do lose a lot of talent, but they're in a place right now where they want to prove that last year wasn't just a fluke, that they weren't a one-hit wonder. So, I'm expecting a really hard-fought game there. I would go with Illinois heading the season if I'm picking a winner, but I could see it going either way, and I just love the storyline of last year's surprise team, the team that going against the team that wants to be this year's surprise team, and just seeing what shakes out.
Tim, thoughts on Illinois, Indiana? Which of those teams? Not to say that you need to necessarily pick the game, but who are you buying more stock in? So as Jared just said, Illinois. He has Illinois as a trendy pick in the college football playoff. I think we've seen that a lot this offseason. Indiana getting some preseason rankings, right? Like we're saying, could Illinois be last year's Indiana? But I think part of what made Indiana just the whole story incredible was the fact that they went into last season with no real expectations, right? They weren't ranked or anything like that. So different Indiana this year being ranked. They do lose a lot, but I think landing Fernando Mendoza from the transfer portal was really big for them to have that type of quarterback. So who do you buy more stock in, Illinois or Indiana?
Well, I guess it's hard because, with both these teams, they don't have a track record of consistency. You have this once in a blue, or you have a great season like Indiana did last year. You finished ranked. I'm thinking back to 2020, the weird COVID Indiana. I think they were ranked most of the year. I think they finished ranked, and then they followed that up the following year, going 2-10 in 2021. And Illinois has a long history of following up historically great seasons by just face planting. So definitely there's some pressure to try to buck the trend there. But I would say I'd put more stock in Illinois at this point. I just think they return a little more. And, I think, Cincinnati had an excellent debut. But then Bielema's, he's just has a longer track record in the Big Ten compared to Cignetti. And I think then also given what Illinois is coming back, I would put more stock into the Illini. But look, Indiana, I think they're on I think they seem poised to at least, I think maybe finish the year ranked. Have like a nice 8-9 win season even.
9 wins. I mean, 9 wins would potentially. I mean, it's always tough on in July to be like what is going to be a playoff resume, what isn't. But yeah, if Indiana can certainly be at that 9-win territory, then they're looking around the cusp of a potential playoff burst. We'll see what happens in the SEC. If the SEC could be so nice as to allow some other teams into the playoff, we'll see. Before we go on to week 5, just want to say for week 4. So, Jarrett, you did have Illinois at Indiana. I like Michigan at Nebraska. I think that would have been my pick there. I like. We'll see what happens with Michigan. If they can beat Oklahoma, they're going to have some hype going into that game. Nebraska has a pretty easy schedule this year, all things considered. So there's a good chance that the Cornhuskers as well could be undefeated going into that game, which I don't know if that is. I hope that ends up not be. Sorry, I'm just looking at the schedule here real quick. I don't think that hasn't been time set for that yet, right? Let's see.
Michigan, Nebraska.
3:30 on CBS. Okay, I was gonna say as long as it's not big noon, then I think the atmosphere will be good. So I don't know. I want to look more into what Nebraska is this year before I kind of go in on them. But I know Matt Rule is a polarizing figure in Penn State territories. Either you're allowed to love him or hate him. There's no in between. You either have to be completely for Matt Rule or completely against Matt Rule. I like to think I'm more in the middle, but I am a believer in Matt Rule being a pretty good football coach. So interested to see what Nebraska does this year. Jarrett?
I'm curious to see how Raiola looks this year. I mean, obviously he was a true freshman, played as a true freshman at times, but I mean, he's the type of guy who can take a huge leap this year and really, kind of carry that offense a bit if he has a really good offseason and develops to his potential. Sorry, before we move on, though, I did want to mention this week also has Oregon State and the Apple Cup with Washington State. So I don't know if I like either Washington State or Oregon State to pull off the upset there, but you got 2 great rivalry games and, you never know what could happen. So definitely those 2 are worth at least keeping an eye on, and you may get a really entertaining finish.
Washington State did beat Washington last year, so certainly could see them do it again, but yeah, it's just I Oregon might have been like my favorite under the radar. I don't want to say under the radar rivalry, but right, like not the Auburn, Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan. So a shame that game has kind of gone by the wayside, but we'll see if Oregon State can kind of get back to the program that they once were. Week 5, I think that we will probably all be in agreement on this one. It's actually a pretty good week. Ohio State at Washington. Indiana at Iowa is another interesting game. You have USC coming to Illinois, so another test for Illinois. But there's going to be one big primetime kick in Happy Valley. That is Oregon coming to Penn State. Jarrett, that has to be the pick, I assume.
Yeah, that was the obvious pick. I mean, you got a rematch of the Big Ten championship game last year that ended up being, very highly entertaining, much more high scoring than any Penn State fan was hoping for, but still a pretty fun shootout to watch. Obviously, we haven't gotten into this yet because this is Penn State's first big game of the year. We actually haven't even mentioned a Penn State game because the first 3 games are Nevada, Villanova, and
we should have mentioned Villanova, the battle for Pennsylvania.
Yes.
If many are calling it.
Yeah, but so this is really Penn State's first test. They have a really interesting start to the season with those 3 non-conference games that shouldn't pose too much of a threat. Then they get a bye, and then they get Oregon in week 5. So. And then on top of that, it's the whiteout game, the best atmosphere in sports. Oregon's going to be breaking in a lot of new starters. I'm assuming Dante Moore is going to be the starting quarterback for the Ducks, who has, he came there very highly rated, very highly rated prospect. I think a 5-star, I believe.
5-star, yeah.
So he's got potential. He hasn't really done too much yet. Doesn't have a lot of experience, but. Obviously, he's in the right system there where he could really succeed. But still, that's going to be a challenge for him for an experienced quarterback. Yeah. I think they lose a lot in their offensive line as well. So I'm really hoping between, Penn State's defense and deny Dennis Sutton and Zane Durant and some of those guys really being disruptive that day. The crowd making a big difference and, really helping shut down the Ducks offense. But I'm definitely not going to take anything for granted. It's going to be a top 5 matchup, I'm sure, and we don't need to remind Penn State fans about that narrative against top 5 teams. So
James Franklin,
it's going to be a great game. Oregon's going to be have a lot of talent, and even though they're replacing a lot of people, they'll still be a very strong team. They've been recruiting like crazy the last few years, so they'll be able to reload. Penn State can find a way to get the W here, though. That's going to be a huge deal for their confidence, just because it kind of feels like they just really need that one breakthrough game. And once they feel like they have that ability, then, it'd be interesting to see how that carries over from there. But
to kind of go off that, because this is something that I've just been, as I'm preparing for the season for Penn State, right? It comes down to that Oregon game and then going to Ohio State on November 1st. In almost every other season, right? I think people would say Penn State, you need to beat Ohio State. That's the game. If we can win one game this year, it's beating Ohio State, knowing that they're always going to be a top 5 team. Tim, what game is more important for Penn State to win? Not which game would we rather, because I think, like, from a personal perspective, just, how Ohio State has beaten us down. But from big picture, what game do you think is more important for Penn State to win? If they can go 1-1, which I think if you ask any Penn State fan, I'll take a 1-1 against the Oregon Ohio State slate. What game is more important for Penn State to win?
I would say it's the Oregon game. I mean, this is a home game. This is a whiteout. Penn State is a 4.5-point favorite right now, according to FanDuel. And as Jared said, this should be a top 5 matchup when it happens. So this is a golden opportunity for James Franklin to get that rare top 5 win and, shut the haters up for at least until after the game in Columbus this year. But it's like I said, this is I think I like Penn State's chances in this, especially when you consider that Oregon, they're bringing in, they have a new starting quarterback, Dante Moore, talented kid, but this will be his first road game. And it's, at night at Beaver Stadium in the whiteout of all places.
First road game at Oregon. He did start some games.
Or first road game at Oregon, we should say. But still, I mean,
same idea though.
You don't want your first road game at Oregon ideally to be, the Penn State whiteouts. And, they are missing a couple star receivers from last year. Tez Johnson moved on in the NFL. And unfortunately, Evan Stewart, who is probably the best returning receiver, suffered a terrible injury. He is out for the season. So hope he recovers soon. But, I'm sure they've got some guys right in the wings. But, again, I think Penn State's also bringing back a ton of talent themselves. I mean, there's a reason why, Phil Steele has them number 1 in his preseason magazine, and why, they're getting. I'm constantly seeing them listed in like the top 4 and every that can come across, online and offline. So, I think this, like I said, I think this is a more important. If I had to pick only one game for them to win between Oregon and Ohio State, it's got to be Oregon. I mean, that's there for the taking. I mean, obviously, look, beating Ohio State and Columbus, especially if, for Drew Aller, the Ohio kid, his last shot is at doing so in an Inline uniform would be awesome. But if I can only pick one, just give me a whiteout win.
That is fair. Well, I'm sure we will talk much more about that as we make our way through the off season and eventually get to that game. Let's move on to week 6. Again, not a great week as far as matchups are considered. Wisconsin at Michigan, Penn State at UCLA with Nico there, Michigan State at Nebraska, Minnesota at Ohio State, Washington at Maryland. So not a ton of great matchups. So, Jarrett, where'd you go with this poo-poo platter of
Yeah, this isn't the most intriguing week. I went with Michigan, Wisconsin, kind of for reasons we've already discussed. We probably don't need to go into very much, but it's kind of a make or break year for both teams in a way, more so than Wisconsin than Michigan. But both programs looking to turn things around from where they were at least a year ago. And like I mentioned earlier, it's a great helmet game. I've watched many really entertaining Wisconsin Michigan games throughout my lifetime, so it just kind of seemed like in a week where there isn't anything that really jumps out at you, that's a game you can kind of cozy in and probably enjoy for 3 hours.
Yeah, I mean, it's a slice of Big Ten Americana and the ever changing landscape of the Big Ten. Wisconsin, Michigan certainly screams Big Ten football. Going to keep it moving here, unless Tim, you have any thoughts on that game, or can we go on to week 7?
The only thing I was going to add is, I mean, maybe Michigan State, Nebraska could be somewhat intriguing depending on how good either of those teams are. But otherwise,
I don't think that's week 6.
No, I have week 6. Michigan State at Nebraska.
Michigan. Oh, sorry. Okay, you are right. I didn't see that. All right. Yeah, certainly. Let's go on to week 7 though. Sorry, I had week 7 up. That's why cause for confusion there. Week 7, a little bit better of a slate. There's Ohio State at Illinois. There's Michigan at USC, which is, I don't want to say classic Big Ten, but classic Rose Bowl matchup. Rutgers at Washington on a Friday night, which is maybe like the Big Ten should just make that like a permanent thing. I like the idea of every year Washington and Rutgers just have a 9:00 game.
It was a very entertaining game last year.
Yeah.
A late Friday night game.
Same thing. Yeah. Let's just do Michigan or let's do Rutgers, Washington Friday night every year. Jarrett, where did you go with this one?
I went Ohio State at Illinois. I just kind of think what the season Illinois is hoping to have, and if they can get past Indiana, there's a good chance you're looking at 2 undefeated teams playing. So there's going to be a ton of hype coming in this game. Illinois is going to be in the spotlight. Good chance it'll be the college game day, at least the big noon Saturday. So Illinois, after just a lot of years just basically being a cellar dweller in the Big Ten, they kind of get their chance in the spotlight. And what better way to prove yourself than taking down the defending national title, the team that's won the Big Ten nearly every year, going back the last couple of decades or so. So it's just a huge opportunity for Illinois. Those guys are going to come in so fired up, and the stakes will be high. And like I said, this is just a really huge opportunity for them to prove themselves and how good they could be this year, where their ceiling is. So they're going to throw everything at the Buckeyes they have and go from there. That's
very interestingly one of the things that Urban Meyer struggled with, but Ohio State would lose like a random, like they'd go to Purdue, they lose to Purdue, they'd go to Iowa, they lose to Iowa.
Michigan State.
Sometimes
to them.
Yeah, sometimes blow up fashion. Ohio State, for the most part, on Ryan Day, they don't have those losses other than to Michigan, which, other than this past season, Michigan has generally been ranked. So, an interesting thing there going to what should be. I think Illinois will probably still be ranked at that point if they are who we think they are. Tim, 2 questions for you. One, do you agree that this is the best game that week? Because I don't know. Michigan at USC, maybe I'm just falling for the uniforms, but I kind of lean there. And then secondly, Ohio State, Illinois, what do they play for? What is the name of their trophy? Putting you on the spot.
Well, I'll answer your second question first. They play for the Yellow Buck Trophy.
There we go.
I learned that from playing NCAA football for so many years when I was younger. But then, yeah, so when I was looking at the schedule, Ohio State and Illinois is the one that stuck out to me the most. And as Jared just stated, good chance both these teams are undefeated coming into this, or I would definitely expect at the very least both teams are ranked going into this. Maybe Illinois loses to Indiana on the road, perhaps, but I'd be surprised if it isn't the top 25 matchup. And this may be Illinois' best shot at knocking off the Buckeyes since Juice Williams and company rolled into the shoe in 2007 and shocked the then number 1 ranked Ohio State team there. So everyone sticks out to me. But Michigan, USC, as you said, that's that's another one I got an eye on. I think USC is looking for a little revenge after blowing a fourth quarter lead there last year, a game which they seemingly had control of and then let slip away. So,
story of the USC season.
Yeah, pretty much. So we'll see. It's a different story in the Coliseum, but yeah, those are the two games that are stick out to me the most.
Week 8, better slate, some interesting games. There's USC at Notre Dame, which is technically one team is in the Big Ten. Technically, we can count that for this exercise that we're doing. Nebraska at Minnesota, which is, I was just about to say it's a classic Big Ten matchup, but yet Nebraska's only been in the Big Ten for 12 or 11 years, but it feels like a classic Big Ten team at this point. Washington at Michigan, an interesting game, a rematch of the national title from 2 years ago, which is crazy to think about, given where those two programs were last year and will likely be coming into this year as well. And then Penn State at Iowa. Jared, where'd you go with this one?
So I will say this week up to this point was probably the most difficult decision because there probably isn't a marquee blockbuster game, but there's a lot of very intriguing games, a lot of games I'm looking forward to watching. Ultimately, I went with Penn State and Iowa. I may have gone a different direction if it was in Happy Valley, but considering, the history in Kinnick, hoping for I don't believe the kickoff time's been announced yet. Actually, I can say it hasn't been. Hoping for noon game, but most likely to probably end up being in the evening.
I believe it is going to be a noon game.
Oh, okay. Well, I hope that's the case because
USC Notre Dame is 7:30 on NBC.
So. Yeah, great point. Great point. So there's a good chance we're looking at a big noon kickoff. But I was offense really took some strides last year, but interestingly enough, their defense kind of backslid a little bit from their standards. So I'm kind of interested in see how Iowa comes out this year. If they can keep making those steps forward in offense, and if they can get the defense back to where they were, they got a chance to be very good. At the very least, what you're getting with Iowa. You're going to get a team that's strong in the trenches, that plays smart football, that doesn't, they're just not going to beat themselves. So you need to really, come out and take that game seriously and just not beat yourself because they will make you pay for your mistakes. I do have that feeling just because it's in Kinnick that we'll probably be in for at least the first half where we're all, having our little mini meltdowns on the Slack channel and a bunch of weird things happen and Iowa gets a whole bunch of bounces. I do feel pretty confident Penn State will come out on top, but I'm expecting a bumpy ride. Whenever we visit the Hawkeyes, it always seems to be the case.
Do you guys know who Iowa's quarterback is going to be this year off the top of your head?
So I feel like I do, but I can't.
I know he's an FCS transfer from South Dakota State. I want to say
yes. Mark, I believe it's pronounced Gronowski is the quarterback. Which I don't know if you guys have seen much of this guy. 6'3", 230 pounds. Basically uses his body as like a battering ram, or at least that's how South Dakota State used him. So he carried the ball 98 times, 93 times, 111 times, 83 times the last 4 seasons. So they just ran this guy into the ground. I believe he had I shouldn't say shoulder surgery. He was out this spring with some sort of injury, but just like a very not who you think as an Iowa quarterback of, you think of the classic drop back passer guy, doesn't run that much. So them making
sounds like how Penn State used Will Levis.
I mean, it's I was gonna say like a poor man's like Tim Tebow, but kind of similar in that sense of a big strong guy that just runs right into the middle of the defense. But Tim, thoughts on going to Kinnick? I mean, I feel like Penn State actually has fared decently well in Kinnick, all things considered. I mean, winning in 2017 certainly feels good, but there's still that I don't want to say the magic of Kinnick because it's not magic for Penn State.
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, I do think. Well, look, they always do give Penn State a difficult time in Kinnick, but I do think some of the concern is a little bit overblown, just a tad overblown. And I think this is a game where, I think Iowa certainly can cause some problems early on. And, their MO is going to be, it's going to be similar when they played them a couple of years ago. They're just going to sit defensively. They're just going to make sure to keep everything in front of them. They're not going to allow the big explosive play to happen, like Aller throwing a deep ball over them over the top. But, the way Penn State beat them last time in the shutout win was, they're like, okay, you're going to let us take those easy, 8-10 yard passes, well, sure. We'll do that all night long. We'll dink and dunk our way downfield. We'll run it a little. And we'll just march down the field on you guys. And they basically beat Iowa at their own game. So I expect to see something similar like that. I think Penn State has the talent and depth advantage in this one. And I think, after a close first half or 3 quarters, it really starts to rear its head come the fourth quarter when Penn State's just wearing the Hawkeyes down.
Yeah, I'm guessing Iowa's starting offense gets more than 2 first downs this time around, but hoping it's
That's
not
a safe bet.
that. but probably definitely more than they mustered last time.
Certainly, once again, we will be talking much more about Penn State and Iowa and all these games as we get closer to the season. Going to week 9, we have Illinois at Washington. We have Wisconsin at Oregon. We have Minnesota at Iowa. I already said Wisconsin at Oregon. Michigan State. So, Jarrett, once again, I don't want to say that the Big Ten doesn't have that many great games, but I feel like a lot of these weeks we're saying, not that great of a game, which we are starting to head into November, which is where we will see a lot of these bigger matchups. But what were you thinking for this week?
Yeah, there was a few solid ones. Not the best week though, but I ended up going with Illinois at Washington just because as I've noticed as I've noted, I'm pretty high in Illinois this year, so I think that'll be a big challenge for them if they do turn out to have a good season.
The third Illinois game that you picked.
Yeah. much more than pretty much any other year I would.
Sleeper cell for Illinois, Jarrett.
Yeah, but I do think that that'll be a challenge for them, and I'm interested to see what Washington does. I do think Jed Fish is a really good coach. Did wonderful things at Arizona. He was kind of starting from scratch last year, where Washington was just replacing literally everybody, coaching staff, all their starters. A good chunk of their roster was gone. So I think that you'll see an improvement from Washington this year. So considering Illinois has got a pretty lengthy road trip out there, I think it'll be a pretty good game. And like I was saying, if Illinois does turn out to be a playoff contender this year, this is going to be one of those games they'll really need to get. And I think Washington definitely pose a challenge.
Tim, agreement with Jarrett, this being the best game, Illinois at Washington. I kind of think, and once again, this just might be looking at the uniforms and taking past years and putting in this year, but I think I'd go with Michigan State. If I can only watch one game this week, I think I'd go Michigan State.
Yeah, Pat, you and I think we're thinking the same thing. Illinois, Washington, that certainly could be an intriguing game. And I don't know about Wisconsin. I'm not high in Wisconsin. And it's, last year, obviously, they nearly upset them in Camp Randall, but I think it's a different story in Autzen Stadium. I guess Minnesota, Iowa, little rivalry game there. That could be if you like classic Big Ten football, lots of ground and pound and low scoring defensive struggles. That's a game for you. But yeah, Michigan State, Michigan, that's the one that probably sticks out to me. In-state rivalry, and I guess I don't know what to make of Michigan State. Like Jarrett said, they could, Jonathan Smith's a good coach. Maybe they make a leap this year, have a winning record. Could, in rivalry games, they say throw out the records. If they
shout out
a competitive enough team, I think you could be in for a good one between the Wolverines and Spartans.
Yeah, we've seen so many great Michigan State games over the year too. That's series that it's always worth keeping an eye on. You get a really phenomenal matchup there. So,
moving on to week 10, there's one easy game, being that we are Penn State fans, but if you're not a Penn State fan, this has to be, I think, the game of the week. Michigan State at Minnesota is on here, Rutgers at Illinois, USC at Nebraska, but none of them really hold a candle to what will be Penn State going to Ohio State. Jarrett, not to steal your thunder, but this is your pick. So thoughts on this matchup for the going on the 9th year that Penn State has I think we're 0-8 in our last 8 games.
8-game losing streak. Yeah. And I do promise I didn't put too much thought into Illinois Rutgers. I was all Ohio State this week. So, and to Patrick's point, at some point I really want to quit saying, bring up the losing streak when we're talking about Ohio State. There's been so many close calls, and got our hopes up many times and just haven't been able to get the job done. This kind of feels like, if not now, then when. I know we've probably even said that a couple times over the last couple of years, but it really feels that way this year when you look at what one team is bringing back compared to what the Buckeyes are losing from a year ago. The one point I wanted to make about Penn State this year that hasn't come up yet, that I'm really interested to see how this plays out, but I'm very, very excited for Penn State's offensive line, just considering the amount of talent and depth that they have. And best case scenario is we have a phenomenal offensive line that can just go out there, push guys around, and execute. Kind of like, and I'm not saying they're going to be like Alabama and Peacock or Saban, but if you remember some of those years where they didn't really do anything flashy, they just had a bunch of dudes up front that pushed people around, and they had a good backfield that could just take advantage of those lanes. And, they just went out there and execute, just played some good old fashioned smash mouth football. So I think we'll have a good idea if the offensive line has that type of potential, but this will be one game for sure. Ohio State always has plenty of talent on defense in the front seven. So this will be interesting to see. Can they just, go out there, out physical, win the trenches, and just create holes for Allen Singleton to have a big day?
That's been what's held them back in almost every big game, but specifically the Ohio State game, is that as good as Phil Trautwein has done with the offensive line and Penn State's offensive line, I think going back to 2022, since then, it's what I would say is a strength of the team. They have never been able to run the ball consistently against Ohio State. That has been their bugaboo, which, that's Ohio State's been starting, NFL guys, their defensive line during that time. It's certainly no shame to not be able to run for 6.2 yards per carry. But, with, as you were saying, Jarrett, with so much of Penn State's, you got some deer in the background. Look at that. Nature.
Oh,
Wow, that was
a couple babies. Yeah.
Oh, look at what if you're still here in minute 52, you just got nature. Beautiful deer. Anyway, Tim, I'll kick it to you because I've lost my train of thought. Penn State needs to run the ball against Ohio State, right? That is their identity. As nice as, we're Drew, going to win the Heisman for sure, 100%. Got some wide receivers from the portal, but this offense will be about Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, and this offensive line hopefully punishing teams, and that includes Ohio State.
Absolutely. You can't have your tight end be your leading rusher like you had last year with Tyler Warren. I mean, did rip off a very nice run to set them up. Like 5 yards from the end zone.
How many carries did he get once he got him down to the 3-yard line, Tim?
0.
How many
0.
carries? Oh,
We will never forget.
Once they try to call his number, and do a little wild Warren package or try to feed him the ball somehow. But that's I'm not going to rehash that. But
no, I actually do want to rehash this because now after seeing these deer, I'm reinvigorated. What is more maddening looking back on it? The 4th and 5 call against Ohio State in 2018, or Penn State having the ball 4 times on the goal line when they were just on the goal line 2 quarters before that and 3 interception. So, and not giving it to Tyler Warren. So what is more maddening? Because I think
it's easily so. I'm torn on the 4th and 5 call because I do think it was a good play call theoretically. The issue with it is that it went right into what's this?
Chase Young.
Thank you. I could not think of his name. One of the many, many phenomenal defensive ends. But literally, they just ran right to him, and he just blew up his guy and met Miles Sanders in the backfield. So the play call I don't hate, just the fact that they just thought for whatever reason that was a good idea. I do have to go with last year's being more frustrating because you got 4 downs. You got one of the best players in the nation. I mean, I would have been fine if they would have taken one of those plays and just jumped up and down and said, hey, we're going to give the ball to Tyler Warren. just at least they would have tried it, you know?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Jared.
At least give him a chance. Even the Buckeyes were expecting it. It was like one of those things where the moment got too big for them and they were trying to just outsmart other guys instead of just saying this is what we can do to get the ball in the end zone.
I think you said it best. I think Andy Koenig was trying to think of something that maybe they wouldn't expect, as opposed to just be like, all right, screw this. Let's have Tower just run right at them and see what happens. You know, if it gets stopped, it gets stopped. Okay, at least you tried. I mean, that's what annoys me the most. They didn't even try. Like, yeah, and the 4th and 5 thing, I guess I didn't like the call because it took the ball out of Trace McSorley's hands, and Trace was their best player that night.
And he had the game of his life that night.
He was. Really, they should have been up by a lot more early on. They would have, but you know, again, I'm not going to go rehashing past losses to Ohio State. But I guess my own thoughts on this. I mean, I think I mentioned it earlier, but you know, for Drew Auer, Ohio kid, kind of got spurned by the Buckeyes until they came calling last minute. I think it's his last chance to get the win over them, and he's probably got the most stacked team to potentially do it with. And of course, it helps that Penn State now has Ohio State's former defensive coordinator Jim Knowles calling the shots defensively as well. I don't know about you, but I think he's a better coordinator than Matt Patricia, who's now the coordinator for the Buckeyes. That being said, of course, Ohio State is still sickly talented, even through replacing a bunch of starters. And of course, Caleb Downs, one of, if not the best defensive player in college football. So, and you got Jeremiah Smith, arguably one of maybe the best offensive player in college football. So, it's obviously it's going to come down to, Penn State's got to be able to, they got to have a more consistent running game than they did last year.
Can I give you guys a hot take? And maybe this isn't that hot, and I feel safe doing it, right? We're going on an hour in here, so it's not going to get like aggregated, and Ohio State fans aren't going to yell at me on Twitter because I don't think they'll find this. But I think Jeremiah Smith is good. I think he's really good. I don't know if he is, like, I've seen some people say he's LeBron James of football. I'm sorry, I just don't think that. I think that, right, is he any different from Larry Fitzgerald, Michael Crabtree, Julio Jones, AJ Green, Devontae Smith? Like, we've had a lot of really, 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 Justin Blackmon, Dez Bryant, like, we've had a lot of really, really good wide receivers. I don't look at Jeremiah Smith and say, oh, I think he's on a different level. And I kind of wouldn't be surprised if I don't want to say that he plateaus, because if he plateaus, he's still right a top 5 NFL pick. But I don't, pardon me if I don't think that he's like the best wide receiver, bar none, of the last 20 years, the way that some people talk. Am I crazy for saying that, or?
No, he's definitely obviously has big playability. I think this will be a big season for him as far as just adding polish to his game. Where can he do all the things that made Marvin Harrison Jr. such a great game, such a great player rather, and so unstoppable. Where he's the guy right now where he's got that Calvin Johnson, that Larry Fitzgerald to him, where you can throw the ball up to him and expect him to win his matchup, maybe even beat 2-3 guys for the ball, even depending who they're playing and who's on him. But yeah, I do think he can add a lot more to his game. So we'll kind of see where he goes from here. It's a big season development for him as far as is he going to be I don't want to say a one-trick pony necessarily, because he's so good at what he does, but is he a guy who you can kind of, go to on 3rd and 4 and catch a pass over the middle and take it and kind of do all these other things in addition to getting the big plays?
And again, I'm saying best receiver in the country, All-American, a definite top 10 pick whenever he decides to come out, injuries aside.
I'm curious to see what annoying nickname Gus Johnson gives him, like he did with Maserati Marv.
Why do you have to do that, Tim?
Wasn't
I'm
it-
already annoyed. And I even heard it.
Hold on, it was wasn't it Jeremiah Smith, Gus Johnson? He has a name. It's like
Did he?
Oh, does he?
Young Money or Money on the Rise. Money on the Rise.
Money on the Rise.
Come on.
Well, get ready to hear Money on the Rise like a bunch of times.
He might have to change that though, because especially by the point that Jeremiah Smith is a junior, he will be like risen. So just be Money that has risen will be the nickname.
Like Scrooge McDuck.
No, I don't know. I just think you look at so many Braylon Edwards. Like there's been so many really, really good wide receivers throughout the last 20 years that I don't know if this guy is the LeBron James of college football. But
That's a fair
anyway,
one. Yeah.
Anyway.
I do have a quick before we move on to the next week. I just need to ask you guys something. Are either of you willing to go on the record right now and say that Penn State has more than a 50% chance of winning this game?
No.
Okay. I'm not. I can't say that either. There's too much history.
I got to see it to believe it at this point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not saying they have zero chance, but I'm not willing to say it's like 50% or greater.
If Penn State was like 2-6 or even like 3-5 these last 8 years, I'd feel pretty confident. But considering I need to see it to believe it.
It's mental at this point for Franklin against Ohio, just like it's mental for Ryan Day against Michigan.
Mhm.
So you just got to go out and find a way to win and, break that mental block. So
Yes, we'll maybe we have like a commiserate over the Ohio State games of years past podcast. I feel like we can have like just an hour long.
oh boy, we could easily cover an hour doing that.
We have to hire a therapist though. We need to get someone like a medically licensed therapist to talk. Anyway, all right. Week 11. Jared, I like that you were like, hey, this will make for a good 20 to 30 minute video. We are over an hour into this. All right, week 11. Here we go. We have Northwestern at USC. We have Indiana coming to Penn State, Nebraska, UCLA, Ohio State, Purdue, Oregon, Iowa, Washington, Wisconsin, some good games. I don't think any of those like truly stick out. So Jared, where are you thinking with this one?
So I nearly went, and maybe I should have gone Penn State, Indiana. I didn't want to go Penn State back-to-back weeks. And plus, the other thing is I'm not certain what Indiana will look like by, into November. So I went with Oregon at Iowa for the reasons we kind of already mentioned about the Penn State at Iowa game. Oregon's going to be, I don't know if this might be their first trip to Kinnick. I wouldn't be surprised if it is. But I think they're going to experience one of those weird, this is probably much more likely to be a night game, but I think they may be in for a really weird night at Kinnick, and I wouldn't be shocked to see the Hawkeyes be able to pull off the upset here, especially if Oregon offense doesn't develop quite the way that some believe they might. By then, obviously, be late in season, they won't be breaking starters anymore, but I could just see something weird happening, and kind of like what happened with Oregon at Wisconsin last year, where their offense just couldn't get going. And maybe Iowa just makes a big play at the end or find a way to get a turnover and a game-winning field goal or something. But I could see this going down to the wire and Iowa pulling off the upset here. Just have a feeling.
So I looked it up. Oregon has played. Well, they played at Iowa in 1949. I assume that Kinnick wasn't around then. I'm guessing. But they also played in 1989, and Oregon won 44-6. So Oregon has some pretty good history in Kinnick Stadium back in 1989, but obviously completely different.
Actually, Pat, Kinnick did exist. It was built in
1949. When was it built?
1929, October 5th, 1929.
All right. Well, Iowa won that one. So at the very least, Oregon is 1-1, and Kinnick will see if they can make that 2-1. Tim, thoughts on that week? Are you in agreement that Oregon, Iowa is the way to go here?
Yeah, that was my thought looking at this. I mean, it was tossed between that or the Indiana Penn State. But I guess I was thinking the same lines as Jared. I mean, I was thinking back to Oregon, being tested on the road at Wisconsin last year, and I think Iowa can provide a similar kind of test. I think Oregon's talented enough that they can eke out the win, but I guess I wouldn't be surprised though if that does end in a loss. But I think that's the most extreme. And then Indiana Penn State, if Indiana is good again, that certainly is another intriguing one because win or lose, Penn State will be coming out of Columbus with a lot of bruises, and then you got to regroup and play a feisty Kurt Signetti coach team right off of it. So, yeah, I mean, I think you can make a case for either of those being the Big Ten game of the week.
Moving on to week 12. Week 12. So it's a pretty good slate. Iowa at USC, Wisconsin at Indiana. We also have UCLA going to Ohio State. Minnesota at Oregon on a Friday night, which sounds pretty good. Although I will say that if that was at Minnesota, I think that maybe has a little bit more juice to it. So Jarrett, where'd you go with this one?
I ended up going with Iowa at USC. I wasn't crazy about a lot this schedule or this week rather. I feel like there's a couple potential upsets there, but I don't think there's a whole lot of guaranteed good games for that one. But I do think Iowa USC will be pretty competitive. I love the thought of Iowa, playing a game in Los Angeles. And the thing that really excites me about this game is just the thought of a Lincoln Riley offense versus a Kirk Ferentz defense. I just think that's a really interesting matchup. Iowa always has a really good secondary. They're always one of the leaders in the nation in interceptions. I think it was 2, maybe 3 years ago, where it just seemed like they had like 4 interceptions every game. I think they were first in that statistic by a mile. So yeah, I just really like that matchup. I think it'll be just a really kind of fascinating contrast of styles, just to kind of see how that unfolds.
Tim, some trivia for you. 2003 Orange Bowl, Iowa and USC played. Who were the starting quarterbacks for both teams? And Jarrett, you can partake as Tim can.
Okay, so Carson Palmer was starting for USC. I believe Iowa was Brad Banks.
Yeah, Brad Banks. Okay. Yeah, it definitely was Brad Banks. So little fun fact about 10-year-old Pat, loved Brad Banks. The coolest. I didn't realize. I thought that Iowa was cool my entire time growing up because I had Brad Banks that 1 year, and then I found out I was not cool at all. Brad Banks
I believe he was a run-up for the Heisman one. I don't know if it was that year, but I think he finished ahead of LJ the year LJ had the 2000.
I think so too. Yeah, now that you mentioned
it. Carson Palmer, then Brad Banks, and LJ.
I think LJ was third. I want to say,
and then Willis McGahee and Ken Dorsey were 4 and 5. I believe.
I can't tell you like what I did on Friday, but I can remember the top 3 Heisman finalists from 2002. So
I always joke I don't have any actual skills, but do you need the top 5 Heisman people from 2002? Yes,
there you go.
I can give you that. Anyway, Tim, thoughts on USC and Iowa?
That's the one I was looking at too. Just again, I guess I'm intrigued by these West Coast teams going out to like Middle America, flyover country, classic Big Ten schools like Iowa or Wisconsin, Illinois, whatever. So I think that one sticks out to me. And so, I'm sorry, I'm an idiot. Iowa's going to USC this time.
The other way around.
But still, I still find it intriguing seeing, these flyover country teams flying over to the West Coast and playing these games. And like I said, the only other game that, I'm on week 13. The only other game that, I think Jared mentioned it too, Wisconsin, Indiana, but that's, again, I'm not high in Wisconsin, so that doesn't, maybe you could say Penn State, Michigan State as well, if Michigan State turns out to be better than we think, like mid-November playing for the land-grant trophy, the greatest trophy in all of sports, and and I feel like Sparty sometimes tends to give us some trouble in East Lansing. So that could be a secretly tough game, perhaps, depending on how things shake out. But, yeah, I would go Iowa USC as my game of the week.
Week 13, we go Nebraska at Penn State, which is, once again, Nebraska has an easier schedule. So I think that there's a chance that Nebraska could be top 25, if not pretty high up in the top 25. Matt Rule coming back to Penn State. USC at Oregon, classic Big Ten matchup. When you think Big Ten football, you think of USC and Oregon. Rutgers goes to Ohio State. Michigan, Maryland. Jarrett, thoughts on this week? Where'd you go?
I want to go to Penn State, Nebraska, but there's been so many years where Nebraska has just been a huge letdown. So I was worried if I picked that game and then we get to that point in the season, Nebraska has like 2 wins. So I end up going USC, Oregon. I do think should be a pretty good game. USC, obviously they do have a lot of talent, and I'm kind of curious to see how things shake out for them because we talked a little about coaches on the hot seat. Lincoln Riley should definitely, be among those guys. They just have not, considering what he did at Oklahoma and such a huge hire that was, they just really haven't done anything too impressive. They are going to be breaking a lot of new players this year, but USC is just one of those teams that sometimes they just think things align, they get things humming, especially the second half of the season. So I do think this could actually be a really good, late November game. So, not huge on my list if I was ranking, all these games throughout the season from top to bottom, but I think it should be a pretty entertaining matchup for sure.
They being USC and Oregon, despite the fact that they were both, Pac-10, Pac-12 powers. Tim, can you, when you think of USC, Oregon, is there any game that really sticks out? Because I'm having trouble. I know at one point, I think Lane Kiffin and USC went in and upset Chip Kelly. I think Marquise Lee, if you remember him at wide receiver, had a big game. But generally speaking, it seemed like they were always on other side of the, I guess maybe some of those Joey Harrington teams, but even those early, that was early Pete Carroll before they really got going. I can't really think of too many great USC Oregon games, right?
I mean, I feel like those games end up kind of like a lopsided result one way or another. Usually,
Yeah.
I'm can't think of one that had a dramatic finish off the top of my head, like a walk-off field goal or something.
That's what I mean. Even compared to
That's a great point.
USC and Cal, I feel like as a kid, you had the Marshawn Lynch and Aaron Rodgers and Deshaun Jackson. You had some of those Cal teams which would come up and sometimes upset or give USC a good run for their money. I don't remember too many USC Oregon, which is weird, just given how good Oregon has been the last 20 years. And obviously,
the only one I can really remember well is it was either 04 or 05, but it was when USC was in the midst of that long winning streak, and there was a game they went into Autzen, and Oregon fought like hell and kind of stuck it out for a while, but you can tell at some point that the tide was going to break. And sure enough, I'm assuming Reggie Bush or Lendale or both of them, broke off some big plays and they end up pulling ahead in the fourth quarter. But I do remember watching one game where the atmosphere is just through the roof. And like I said, Oregon really fought, but USC was just the better team. So, but yeah, that's a great point considering, how good they were at certain times, especially in the 2000s, that they just don't really have any real classic standout moments in that series.
Well, that's why we'll take it as our own. It'll be a Big Ten rivalry from now on. Just going to move on to Week 14, just because we've been going at this for a little bit. Our last week, we finally have made it. We all know last week of the season, the big game is Ohio State at Michigan. Of course, a couple other intriguing games. You have Oregon at Washington. You have Iowa at Nebraska on Friday, which is always nice. Penn State goes to Rutgers, which I think Penn State will be okay. I actually really like Rutgers this year. I still need to do some more research, but I really like what Rutgers brought in transfer portal wise, which is really weird to say, but they actually did a nice job, I thought. But Jared, I assume that you went Ohio State, Michigan.
I did, and just in case this doesn't come up later, I do want to highly recommend watching the Iowa-Nebraska game on Black Friday. I think that's a phenomenal Black Friday tradition. Just plunk down the couch with a big plate of leftovers and enjoy that for a few hours. That's pretty much always a very competitive, very entertaining game. But yeah, I went to Ohio State, Michigan. This year, there's it's always one of the biggest games of the year, even when Michigan had some of those down years. But you got the last two defending national champions, and then obviously you got the 4-game winning streak for Michigan. And I'm just really curious to see how Ohio State responds, how they come out, if they're gonna, if they're gonna pucker, if they're gonna, kind of put the past behind them and learn from their mistakes. Because last year, that might have been the most baffling game I've ever watched in my life, because the only way Ohio State could have possibly lost that game is if they would have taken their weak point, which was an offensive line. If you recall at that time, they were in complete rebuilding mode because they had so many injuries. They were shuffling people around. Their offensive line was struggling at that point. Michigan State's strength by far was their defensive line and those two, phenomenal defensive tackles. So basically their only way a chance Ohio State had to lose that game is if they would have consistently run between the tackles. So what did they do? They consistently run through the tackles between the tackles all game long. And just basically, I think it was just, they wanted to prove that they could be the tough guys and just go out there and out physical. Exactly. That was it. Michigan got in their heads because the last few years, they were the better team in the line of scrimmage, and that's how they were to beat them. And Ohio State said, you know what? This is how we're going to win this game. And they could have beat them any other way. If they just would have thrown a few jump balls to Jeremiah Smith, they win that game. Maybe if they just throw one jump ball to him. I don't even know. I don't know if he had any targets in the second half. I think it was something really wild where they didn't even look his way.
They threw a couple bad interceptions. I mean, one which was almost like a pick six, essentially, because he got tackled like just short of the goal line. They punched it in. Then there's another one. I think the game was tied or something, and I think they had just gotten an interception, and then Will Howard froze an interception right back or something. I mean, it was.
Jack Sawyer had that Michigan was driving the one time, and Jack Sawyer got the interception in the end zone. He thought, okay, there's no way Michigan's going to be able to do anything else. That was their one big chance.
That should have been an easy pitch and catch touchdown for Michigan too. I mean, the quarterback threw like an awful pass to.
Yeah,
Tim. There was a lot of talk, after that Ohio State game and through the playoffs, right? Kirk Herbstreit went on his little diatribe politically during I guess it was a Tennessee game about the lunatic fringe. If Ryan Day loses to Michigan again, will you disavow the lunatic fringe and what they will do to Ryan Day?
I mean, I'm not an Ohio State fan, so I don't know why you're asking about the lunatic fringe. I mean, I want to ask about the lunatic fringe with Penn State fans that want to fire Franklin after every time they lose to Ohio State. I mean, that's nothing. But no, it was a little. They always go a little crazy after losing to Michigan. But granted, it did seem like.
But what I'm saying though, if Ryan Day loses to Michigan again,
like for the fifth time in a row.
Yes. Do you think that the lunatic fringe has a point with Ryan Day? Like what happens to Ryan Day? I'm not saying like they hurt him or anything like that. I'm saying
no, I mean but I know what you meant, but no, I mean it'd be silly to fire him or put him on a hot seat, especially because you're coming off winning a national title. But I mean, I'd understand any and all frustrations with him for not being able to somehow beat Michigan. I mean, again, I was saying earlier, we were talking about Penn State, Ohio State, just like Franklin's got a mental block with Ohio State, Ryan Day's got a mental block with Michigan. And I mean, I really think that mental block just stuck out like a sore thumb last year. I mean, they had no business losing that game. Like, I think I remember saying this to you when we did our post-game show for Penn State, Maryland last year. Like, I did not wake up that morning thinking that I was going to be booking a last-minute flight to Indianapolis at the end of the day, because I assumed Ohio State was going to, beat Michigan by a couple scores, they
just seem like such a better team heading into that game.
So, I I understood why the pressure was on after that loss, because now, you're getting bumped down to playing a first round game, and you lose that to Tennessee. I mean, we're probably talking about a different Ohio State head coach at this point, but I think he's safe for now. I think
how long is that grace period though? I mean, I understand it's like a bit of a silly conversation because more likely than not, I think Ohio State wins.
You give him at least this year. I mean,
Jared, you are native to.
Yeah, I mean, he's Jared. Let's ask Jared, the Ohio kid here. He knows better than us.
Yeah, I've never seen a coach quite in this situation where
That's what I mean.
coming off of a national title and you haven't won the fan base over, which is crazy because he's done everything right. To what you said earlier, I think that's the biggest thing about Ryan Day I noticed when he took over is they don't have these like baffling losses where they just come out like they're completely unprepared and they're like a totally different team. Like they've been very consistent. They just can't beat Michigan. So it's really strange that he's coming from national title. A lot of the fan base still does not like him. Would probably be fine if they decide to go another direction. So you there's been coaches that have won a national title and then had a short honeymoon. Exactly. That's the first name that jumped in my head. There's been others that didn't last long. But yeah, it seems like he's not even getting that honeymoon period. They won a national title, and it's just like, okay, you better find a way to beat Michigan this year.
Yeah. No, and like I think that's what I mean. Like I think that with that fan base, with the lunatic fringe, that they would rather beat Michigan, right? I'm not saying like, oh, we'd rather go 1-11 and beat Michigan than anything else. But I think that if you asked Ohio State fans, they would take 10-2. We beat Michigan. We lose in the first round of the playoffs, as opposed to doing what happened last year. Like I legitimately think, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm a complete idiot, but
I know a lot of Ohio State fans, and I think you're 100% correct.
I think they want to get back to how things were, which was them, dominating Ohio State. I mean, my entire life it was Ohio State. So I don't know. Interesting game, but that's certainly. I mean, that's 5 months from now. 5 months from now. So plenty of time for us to mull over that. All right, fellas, we have been at this for well over an hour. Final thoughts before we go, Jared. Thank you for joining us.
No, I mean, this is the time of year where, I'm not a baseball fan, so kind of once the NBA Finals end, I'm kind of done with sports for a little bit. It's usually a good time of year to maybe catch up on some movies I've been meaning to get to. But yeah, this time of year, I'm happy to like pour through the schedule and just kind of plan my fall. So this is kind of the perfect time for this exercise. So I'm really glad you guys were on board, and I really appreciate anyone who's still viewing or listening to this point. And I hope you enjoyed the deer sighting as well.
This is what happens when you put the three of us in a virtual room together like this,
Yes, just chatty Cathy's. All right. Thank you guys. As always, I got to get better. I always save it for the end. Say subscribe. I need to start doing it in the beginning, in the middle. But if you're still listening to us, please subscribe. Helps the podcast. It helps the show. So if you could subscribe on YouTube, as always, make sure you are reading our stuff on blackshoediaries.com. Yes, it's the off season, but we still have new articles going up every day covering Penn State sports and specifically Penn State football. So make sure you are checking that out. As we go through this off season, we will continue to do more and more podcasts. I don't want to speak for the rest of the crew, but this is as excited as I've been about for a Penn State team in quite a while. So excited to talk more about the team and talk about college football. So we will see you guys soon.